The scream came first. Not the crash. Not the sound of wood splintering. Just my son's scream. Raw and animal. The kind that stops your heart mid-beat. I dropped everything. The groceries hit the floor and I was running, already knowing, somehow knowing, that whatever waited around that corner would change everything. My 7-year-old son hung upside down from the ceiling beam. Rope cutting into his ankles. Face purple. Hands clawing at air. Dying. Right there in our living room. My son was dying. And Vivian, my younger sister, stood beneath him. Watching. Smiling. "Oh, hey, Sarah," she said. Voice bright like we just bumped into each other at the mall. Perfect timing. "We're doing speed training. Fear makes you faster." Right. I didn't think. I lunged for the rope, fingers tearing at the knot she'd tied. The knot she'd planned. The knot that took practice to make. Ethan crashed into my arms when the rope finally gave. He couldn't even cry. Just gasped and shook. His whole body convulsing against mine. The rope had carved deep grooves into his ankles. Skin broken and bleeding. Vivian examined her nails. "God. You're so dramatic." "Mom's right. You're too weak. Your kid's too weak. Someone needs to toughen him up." She grabbed her designer purse. $2,000 of leather that cost more than I made in a month. And headed for the stairs. "I'm going out. Tell Mom and Dad I'll be back for dinner. And Sarah, stop coddling him. The world's going to eat him alive." Her heels clicked up the stairs. The door closed, and I knelt there holding my son who couldn't stop shaking, staring at the rope coiled on the floor like a snake, wondering how my life had become a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Instead, she laughed. It was a bright, musical laugh, the kind you hear at parties or coffee shops, light and airy and completely, horrifyingly inappropriate. The same laugh I remembered from our childhood. From every time she'd done something cruel and gotten away with it. From when she'd locked me in the basement and told our parents I ran away. From when she'd killed my hamster and blamed it on the neighbor's cat. From when she'd convinced our parents I was lying about her stealing from me. And I was the one who got punished. That laugh. That specific laugh that meant she'd won. That she'd gotten away with something. That she was in control, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. "Oh, hey, Sarah," she said. Her voice bright and cheerful. Like I'd just walked in on her baking cookies instead of murdering my child. She gestured up at Ethan with one perfectly manicured hand. Her acrylic nails painted a shade of pink that matched her designer blouse. Perfect timing. "We're running a little experiment here. Fear makes you faster." Right. That's what Dad always says. I'm just putting the theory into practice. You know, real-world application. Hands-on learning. She glanced up at Ethan, who had stopped moving his hands now, whose eyes were starting to roll back in his head. "Although between you and me, I don't think he's getting much faster. If anything, he's getting slower. Disappointing. Really. But that's probably your fault for coddling him so much." The words penetrated my brain like bullets, each one hitting a different part of my consciousness. But my body was already moving. I wasn't in control anymore. Some deeper part of me, some ancient maternal instinct that lived in my DNA, had taken over. The words penetrated my brain like bullets, each one hitting a different part of my consciousness. But my body was already moving. I wasn't in control anymore. Some deeper part of me, some ancient maternal instinct that lived in my DNA, had taken over. I crossed that room in what felt like slow motion and lightning speed all at once. Time did something strange, stretching and compressing simultaneously. I could see everything with horrible clarity. The dust motes floating in the afternoon sun that streamed through the window, the coffee stain on the rug that I'd been meaning to clean, the family photo on the mantel, taken just 6 months ago when we still believed we were safe here, when I still believed my family would protect us. My hands reached the beam and attacked the knot. It was complex, intricate, the kind of knot that takes knowledge and practice to tie. She'd learned this. She'd planned this. She'd thought about how to do this properly. How to make it hold. How to make it last. That realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't an accident. This was premeditated. "Come on. Come on. Come on," I heard someone chanting. and dimly realized it was me. My voice high and frantic and barely recognizable. My fingers were shaking so hard I could barely work the rope. I could feel time running out. Could feel my son's life draining away second by second. The knot finally gave way. The rope loosening. And Ethan dropped. I caught him. Though caught isn't the right word. He fell into me like dead weight. Like his body had forgotten how to help itself. And we both crashed to our knees on the hardwood floor. The impact sent a jolt of pain up my legs, but I didn't care. Didn't feel it. Was only aware of the small body in my arms. So light and so heavy all at once, he made a sound then that I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. A gasping, choking, wet sound, like someone trying to breathe underwater. His hands fisted in my shirt with what little strength he had left, clutching the fabric so tight, his knuckles turned white. And he pressed his face into my neck like he was trying to burrow inside me, trying to get back to the safe place he'd occupied before he was born, before the world could hurt him. His entire body convulsed with tremors, violent, shaking that went bone deep, that felt like it would tear him apart from the inside. I wrapped myself around him, made myself a shield, tried to absorb the shaking into my own body, tried to take his pain and fear and make it mine instead because that's what mothers do. We take the suffering so our children don't have to carry it. I've got you, I whispered into his hair, rocking him, my own voice breaking. I've got you. Baby, you're safe. You're safe now. I'm here. Mommy's here. But he wasn't safe. Not really. Not while we were still in this house. Not while my sister stood 3 feet away watching us with that expression of mild interest. Like we were a moderately entertaining television show. I forced myself to look at his ankles and my stomach turned over. Deep grooves cut into his skin. Angry and red and already bruising around the edges. The rope had bitten in so deep I could see the individual fibers imprinted on his flesh. Some areas had broken skin, raw and weeping. These marks would scar. These marks would be with him forever. A permanent reminder of this moment. Of what his aunt did to him. Of what I hadn't protected him from. My eyes burned. My throat closed. But I couldn't cry. Not yet. Not in front of Vivian. Not while she was still watching. Waiting to see me break down. Waiting to prove that I was as weak as she'd always said I was. I lifted my gaze from my son's damaged body to my sister's unmarked face. She must have seen something in my expression. Something raw and dangerous. Because for just a fraction of a second, her smile faltered. Her hand came up slightly in an instinctive defensive gesture. Her weight shifted backward, putting another inch of distance between us. Good. She should be afraid. She should be terrified. But then her mask snapped back into place like a rubber band, smooth and impenetrable and infuriating. The smirk returned. Sharper now. Crueler. Like a knife being whetted. She held up one hand and examined her fingernails with exaggerated care, turning her hand this way and that to catch the light, making a show of being utterly unbothered by the scene of devastation at her feet. God. Sarah. Seriously. You're so dramatic. She drew out the word dramatic, making it an insult, making it sound like a character flaw. You act like I murdered him or something. Look. He's fine. He's breathing. Isn't he a little oxygen deprivation builds character? Builds mental toughness. He'll thank me later when he's not a complete weakling. She paused, waiting for me to respond. To engage. To give her the reaction she wanted. When I said nothing, we just held my son and stared at her with what must have been pure hatred on my face. She sighed dramatically. Mom's right about you. You know, she's always been right. You're too weak. Too soft. Too emocional. You feel too much and think too little. And you're raising your kid the exact same way. Her eyes flicked down to Ethan with unconcealed disdain. Look at him. 7 years old and clinging to you like an infant. Do you know what Dad would have done if I'd acted like that at his age? If you'd acted like that, he would have locked us outside until we toughened up. And you know what? It worked. We survived. We're stronger for it. No. I thought but didn't say. No. Vivian. We didn't survive. We broke. You broke. You broke so completely that you don't even recognize what you've become. But I didn't say any of that out loud because engaging with her, arguing with her, trying to make her see reason would be pointless. You can't reason with someone who thinks hanging a child from the ceiling is a teaching moment. Vivian continued, warming to her subject, her voice taking on that tone of authority she always used when she wanted to sound wise and experienced. Someone needs to toughen him up before it's too late. Before he becomes one of those men who can't handle anything, who cries at movies and needs therapy to deal with every little problem. The world is going to eat him alive if you keep protecting him from everything. I'm doing this for his own good. I'm doing what you're too much of a coward to do yourself. She actually believed it. I could hear it in her voice. She genuinely thought she was helping. That torturing my son was some kind of public service. Some tough love that would make him stronger. The same way our father had believed it when he'd done similar things to us. The same twisted logic, passed down like a genetic disease, mutating with each generation into something worse. Anyway, she said, reaching down to pick up her purse from the couch, where she'd carefully placed it before hanging my son from the ceiling. The bag was butter-soft leather in a camel color that probably cost more than I made in 2 months at the diner. She slung it over her shoulder with practiced elegance, the movement so casual, so normal, so devastatingly inappropriate given what had just happened. I have plans. Meeting some friends for drinks downtown. Should be fun. She walked past us toward the stairs, her heels clicking on the hardwood. The sound sharp and precise and somehow obscene in its normalcy. At the bottom of the stairs, she paused, one hand on the polished banister, and looked back at us, at me on the floor, still holding my traumatized son, at Ethan's face buried in my neck, his body still shaking, at the rope that lay coiled on the floor like a dead snake. "Tell Mom and Dad I'll be back for dinner around 7, she said, like this was a normal day, like nothing had happened, like we'd just had a mild disagreement about household chores. Then her eyes met mine one more time, and I saw something flicker there. Not guilt, not remorse. Something else. Something that looked almost like amusement. "Oh, and Sarah, you might want to clean him up before they get home. The crying and shaking thing, it's not a good look. Makes you seem like you can't control your own kid. If you're watching this and you've ever felt that moment when you realize the people who are supposed to protect you are actually the ones hurting you most, hit that like button. Subscribe, because this story gets so much worse before it gets better. And I need you with me on this journey. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever had to make an impossible choice to save someone you love. Because that's exactly what I was about to face. But let me take you back to the beginning, to show you how I ended up in this nightmare in the first place. If you're watching this and you've ever felt that moment when you realize the people who are supposed to protect you are actually the ones hurting you most, hit that like button. Subscribe, because this story gets so much worse before it gets better. And I need you with me on this journey. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever had to make an impossible choice to save someone you love. Because that's exactly what I was about to face. But let me take you back to the beginning, to show you how I ended up in this nightmare in the first place. 4 years earlier, I was living what I thought was my own version of freedom. I had moved to Portland, Oregon, 3 states away from my hometown in Connecticut. With my boyfriend Marcus, we met in community college, and he seemed like everything my family wasn't. He was spontaneous where they were rigid. He was artistic where they were practical. He made me laugh when they made me feel small. When I told my parents I was moving across the country with him, my mother's face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical if they weren't so painful. Shock, disgust, and finally, that cold mask of disappointment I knew so well. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," my father said, standing in his study surrounded by the leather-bound books he'd never read and the degrees he displayed like trophies. "That boy has no prospects, no ambition, no family background worth mentioning. You'll come crawling back within a year." Vivian, who was 19 at the time and still living at home while attending the local university on my parents' dime, smirked from the doorway. "At least when she fails, it'll be entertaining," she said. Even then, even in what should have been a moment of familial concern, she couldn't resist taking a shot at me. I left anyway. Marcus and I found a tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood that was supposedly up and coming but was really just affordable. He got a job at a record store and talked about starting a band. I waited tables at a breakfast place that opened at 5 in the morning, which meant I was often asleep by 8 at night while Marcus was out with his friends. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was mine, and that felt revolutionary. Then I got pregnant. I found out on a Tuesday morning, staring at 2 pink lines on a test I'd bought at the drugstore on my way home from my shift. I was terrified and elated and confused all at once. When I told Marcus that evening, he stared at me like I'd just told him I had a terminal illness. "You're joking," he said, setting down his guitar. "I'm not joking. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." He stood up, paced the length of our tiny apartment, which took all of 5 steps, and then sat back down. "Sarah, we can't afford a baby. I can barely afford to feed myself. This place is too small. My job doesn't have health insurance. We're not ready for this." "So what are you saying?" I asked, even though I already knew. I could see it in his face, in the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm saying I think you should consider your options. I'm saying I don't think I'm ready to be a father. I'm saying I'm 23 years old, and I have my whole life ahead of me." We fought for 3 days. Well, I fought. He mostly avoided me, stayed out late, came home smelling like beer and cigarettes, and made it clear through his silence that he'd already made his decision. On the 4th day, I came home from work to find half of his things gone. There was a note on the kitchen counter, written on the back of a receipt. "I'm sorry. I can't do this. The rent's paid through the end of the month. Good luck." Good luck. 2 words that were supposed to make up for abandoning me while I was carrying his child. I crumpled the note, threw it across the room, and then slid down the wall to the floor and cried until I thought I might be sick. When I finally stopped, when the tears dried and the apartment fell silent except for the sound of my own breathing, I made a decision. I was keeping this baby. I was doing this alone. And I was never, ever going back to my parents for help. That resolve lasted 6 months. 6 months of working double shifts, 10 of my feet swelling so badly I had to cut slits in my shoes, of eating ramen and peanut butter sandwiches to save money, of lying awake at night, running calculations in my head that never added up right. 6 months of trying to prove to myself and to everyone who doubted me that I could do this. But pride doesn't pay hospital bills. Pride doesn't keep a roof over your head when your landlord decides to raise the rent by $300 because he knows the neighborhood is gentrifying. When I was 7 months pregnant, I got evicted. The new rent was more than my entire monthly income. I spent 2 weeks sleeping on a friend's couch. Then that friend got a boyfriend who made it clear I wasn't welcome anymore. I ended up in my car, a beat-up Honda Civic that Marcus had left behind because it wasn't worth taking. I'd park in different places each night, trying not to attract attention from cops or parking enforcement. I'd use the bathroom at gas stations, brush my teeth in fast food restaurant sinks, and tell myself this was temporary, just until I figured something out. But winter was coming, and I was running out of options. The morning I woke up in my car with frost on the inside of the windows and couldn't feel my toes. I knew I was out of time. I sat there with my hands on my swollen belly, feeling the baby move inside me, and I cried. Not the angry, passionate tears I'd cried when Marcus left. These were defeated tears, the tears of someone who'd fought as hard as she could and lost anyway. I called my mother. I still remember exactly what I said, how hard it was to force the words out. "Mom, I need help. Please. I'm pregnant, and I have nowhere to go." There was a long silence on the other end, so long I thought she might have hung up. Then she said, "Put your father on the line." And I realized, with a sick feeling, that she thought I was at home, that I'd somehow gotten into their house without permission. "Mom, I'm not at the house. I'm in Portland. I'm calling because I need help." Another silence. Then, "I see. So you've come to your senses." The way she said it, like my desperation was a personal victory for her, should have been a warning. But I was too cold, too tired, too scared to care about her tone. "Can I come home, just until I have the baby and get back on my feet? Let me discuss it with your father. I'll call you back." She called back 4 hours later. 4 hours that I spent sitting in a McDonald's parking lot, sipping water I'd gotten for free, and trying not to think about what I'd do if she said no. When my phone finally rang, I answered so fast I almost dropped it. "Your father and I have discussed it," she said in that formal tone she used when she wanted to sound magnanimous. "We're willing to help you, but there will be conditions. You'll live at home, but you'll contribute to household expenses once the baby is born and you're able to work. You'll follow our rules. And Sarah, if you embarrass this family, if you make us regret this kindness, you'll be out on the street faster than you can pack your bags. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said, hating myself for how grateful I sounded. "Yes, I understand. Thank you. We'll wire you money for a bus ticket. Come home." The trip back to Connecticut took 3 days by Greyhound bus. I spent most of it staring out the window, watching the country roll by. I feeling like I was traveling backwards through my own life. Every mile that brought me closer to my parents' house felt like a defeat, like I was proving my father right. After all. But at least my baby would be born in a hospital instead of in the back of my car. At least we'd have a roof over our heads. At least we'd be safe. I should have known better. I should have remembered that safety and shelter aren't the same thing. I should have remembered what it felt like to grow up in that house, with its impossible standards and conditional love, and the constant feeling that I was never quite good enough, but I was desperate. And desperate people make bad decisions. My mother picked me up from the bus station. She looked older than I remembered, more polished. Her hair cut in a severe bob that made her face look hard. She took one look at my pregnant belly, at my worn-out clothes and my single duffel bag, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "Nice to see you too." "Mom!" The drive to the house was silent except for the hum of her BMW's engine. When we pulled into the driveway, I felt my chest tighten. The house looked exactly the same. Large, imposing, perfectly maintained, every shrub trimmed to precise angles, every window gleaming, a house that looked like success from the outside and felt like a prison from the inside. My father was waiting in the foyer, dressed in slacks and a sweater, despite it being Saturday afternoon. He'd always believed in dressing, like you were ready for an important meeting at any moment. He looked me up and down the same way my mother had, and I saw his jaw tighten. "Sarah," he said. "Not welcome home. Not we missed you. Just my name. Flat and emotionless. Hi, Dad. Your room is ready. Your mother will explain the household rules. Dinner is at 6. Don't be late." That was it. No hug. No questions about my pregnancy or my health or how the trip was. Just rules and expectations and that same cold formality I'd grown up with. I picked up my duffel bag and headed for the stairs, my body aching from 3 days on a bus. My childhood bedroom had been converted into a guest room. All my old posters were gone, replaced by bland landscape paintings. My bookshelf had been emptied and filled with my mother's collection of decorative objects. The only thing that remained from my childhood was the bed, and even that had new sheets, new pillows, everything stripped of personality. I was unpacking my few belongings when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Light, quick footsteps that I recognized immediately. Vivian appeared in my doorway, looking like she'd just stepped out of a magazine. Her hair was highlighted, her makeup perfect, her clothes clearly expensive. She'd always been the pretty one, the successful one, the one who did everything right. Well, she said, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed. "The prodigal daughter returns, pregnant and homeless. Mom and Dad must be so proud." "Vivian," I said tiredly, "can we not do this right now? Do what I'm just stating facts. You ran off with that loser boyfriend, and now you're back here with your tail between your legs and someone else's baby in your belly. Where's the boyfriend? By the way, let me guess." He bailed. I didn't answer, which was answer enough. Vivian laughed. That mean little laugh. She'd perfected as a teenager. "Of course he did. Because you have such great judgment in people. What do you want?" "Vivian." She pushed off the doorframe and walked into the room, picking up one of my few framed photos. A picture of me and Marcus, from before everything fell apart. She studied it with mock interest. "I want you to understand something. This is my house now. Mom and Dad listen to me. I'm the good daughter. The one who didn't screw up her life. So if you think you're going to come back here and pick up where you left off, you're wrong. You're here on probation. Big sister. And I'll be watching. She set the photo down, smiled at me one more time, and walked out. I stood there in my stripped-down childhood bedroom, 7 months pregnant and more alone than I'd ever been, and wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake coming back here. But I had nowhere else to go. So I stayed. Ethan was born on a snowy February night. The labor was long and painful, and the only person with me was my mother, who spent most of the time on her phone texting updates to people rather than actually supporting me. When Ethan finally arrived, red-faced and screaming with a full head of dark hair, I fell in love so completely and so instantly that it hurt. He was perfect. He was mine, and I was going to do everything in my power to give him a better life than the one I'd had. My father came to the hospital the next day. He looked at Ethan through the nursery window for exactly 30 seconds, then turned to me and said, "He looks healthy. That's good. You'll need to be back on your feet quickly. We've already sacrificed enough for your situation. No congratulations. No welcome to the world, grandson. Just a reminder that I was a burden, that my son was a burden, that we were only tolerated, not wanted." The first few months after Ethan was born were a blur of sleepless nights and endless worry. I'd gotten a job waiting tables at a diner within 6 weeks of giving birth, leaving Ethan with my mother during my shifts. She complained constantly about how much work a baby was, how I was taking advantage of her generosity, how she'd already raised her children and shouldn't have to raise mine too. I paid her for babysitting, even though she never asked for it directly. I just started leaving money on the kitchen counter. $20 here, $30 there. Whatever I could afford after paying my parents for food and utilities. It was never enough. There was always something more I owed. Some new expense that needed to be covered. Vivian, meanwhile, had graduated from university and gotten a job at a marketing firm in the city. She still lived at home, but she acted like she was doing us all a favor with her presence. She'd come home from work in her business, casual clothes, and her designer handbag. I make dismissive comments about my diner uniform, and talk about her exciting career while I warmed up bottles for Ethan. She largely ignored Ethan for the first year of his life. He was, in her words, too boring, when all he did was eat and sleep and cry. But as he got older, as he started walking and talking and developing a personality, something changed. She started paying attention to him, not in a warm, aunt-like way, but in a calculating way that made me uneasy. She'd watch him play, studying him like he was a science experiment. She'd make comments about his development, comparing him to her friends' children and always finding him lacking. "He's not walking as steadily as he should be for his age." She'd say, "He should have more words by now. Are you reading to him enough? Playing with him enough? Or are you too busy feeling sorry for yourself?" I bit my tongue through these comments, reminding myself that I needed to stay on good terms with my family until I could afford to leave. I was saving money, slowly but steadily, hiding cash in a box under my mattress. Every tip that didn't need to go toward bills went into that box. I had a plan. By the time Ethan turned 3, I'd have enough for first and last month's rent on a small apartment. We'd be free, but plans have a way of falling apart when you're dealing with people who don't want you to succeed. When Ethan was 18 months old, my father sat me down for what he called a family financial discussion. He had a spreadsheet printed out, because of course he did, showing my contributions to the household versus my usage of resources. According to his calculations, I was costing them approximately $1,500 more per month than I was paying. "This can't continue," he said, sliding the spreadsheet across the table to me. "You're an adult. Sarah, you have a child. It's time you started acting like a responsible parent and paying your fair share." I looked at the numbers, my heart sinking. He'd included things like a portion of the mortgage, utilities calculated by the square footage of my room, depreciation on furniture, and even an estimate of how much my presence cost in terms of groceries. According to this spreadsheet, I should be paying nearly $2,000 a month to live there. "I can't afford this," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm making minimum wage plus tips. After taxes, I bring home maybe $1,400 a month. Then you need a better job. Or a second job. Or you need to make different arrangements for your living situation." "You mean leave?" He didn't blink. I mean that we've been more than generous for 18 months. And that generosity can't continue indefinitely. Either you start contributing appropriately, or yes, you'll need to make other arrangements. I felt trapped. I had maybe $2,000 saved. Not nearly enough to get my own place and support Ethan on my own. If I left now, we'd end up homeless again. Or I'd have to go into debt. Or worse. But staying meant agreeing to terms that would keep me perpetually behind. Always owing them. Always under their control. I signed his new agreement. What choice did I have? That's when things really started to change. With a formal agreement in place, my parents started treating me less like a daughter and more like a tenant who was constantly behind on rent. Every small thing became a financial transaction. Ethan broke a mug. That's a replacement cost. He left the lights on in his room. Extra utilities charge. I stayed in the shower too long, water waste fee. They were bleeding me dry systematically, making sure I could never save enough to leave. And I was so exhausted from working long shifts, from taking care of a toddler, from the constant stress of walking on eggshells in that house, that it took me months to realize what they were doing. By the time I understood, I was trapped more firmly than ever. Vivian, sensing weakness, started circling like a shark. She'd offer to watch Ethan, then criticize everything about my parenting when I got home. She'd buy him expensive toys, then tell him that Mommy couldn't afford nice things like Aunt Vivian could. She'd take him to the park or out for ice cream, and he'd come back talking about how much fun Aunt Vivian was, how Aunt Vivian said he was such a big, strong boy, how Aunt Vivian thought he was special. At first, I was grateful. Having help with Ethan meant I could pick up extra shifts, which I desperately needed to make my parents' inflated rent payments. But then I started noticing changes in Ethan. He became more anxious, more clingy. He'd cry when I tried to leave for work. He'd wake up from nightmares, screaming about monsters and darkness and bad things he couldn't explain. When I asked Vivian what they did together, she'd smile sweetly and say they just played normal games. Learning games. Character-building games. When I asked Ethan, he'd go quiet and shake his head, burying his face in my shoulder. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Then came the first real incident. Ethan was 3 years old. I came home from my morning shift at the diner to find him sitting on the floor of the bathroom, shivering. His lips blue. The bathtub was full of ice-cold water. Vivian was standing in the doorway, watching him with that calculating expression. I'd started to dread. What the hell is going on? I pushed past her and grabbed Ethan, wrapping him in a towel. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. He needed to learn not to complain about bath time, Vivian said calmly. He always whines that the water's too hot. So I showed him what too cold feels like. Now he'll appreciate a warm bath. He's 3 years old. You can't do that to a 3-year-old. She shrugged. Dad used to do the same thing to us. Remember cold showers to toughen us up. It didn't kill us. I did remember. I remembered shivering under icy water, while my father stood outside the shower door, timing me, telling me that discomfort built character. I remembered how it made me feel small and powerless and like my needs didn't matter. And here was my sister, inflicting the same cruelty on my son, as if it were normal parenting instead of abuse. I confronted my parents that night. My mother waved it off as no big deal, said Vivian was just trying to help, said I was overreacting like always. My father told me that if I didn't like how things were done in his house, I was free to leave at any time. But I wasn't free to leave. That was the whole problem. They'd made sure of that. So I stayed. And I watched Vivian more carefully. And I tried to make sure she was never alone with Ethan. But I was working 40, sometimes 50 hours a week, just to meet my parents' demands. I couldn't be there all the time. And every time I left Ethan in that house, every time I kissed him goodbye and headed to the diner, I felt like I was failing him. The incidents became more frequent. Ethan would have mysterious bruises. He'd flinch at sudden movements. He'd cry at bedtime, begging me not to leave him alone. Vivian always had an explanation. Hefel. He was clumsy. He was going through a difficult phase. My parents backed her up every time. Made me feel like I was seeing problems that didn't exist. Like I was being paranoid and overprotective. Gaslighting. That's what it's called. Though I didn't know the term then. They were making me doubt my own perception of reality, making me question whether what I was seeing was really happening, or if I was just a hysterical single mother who couldn't handle the stress. But I knew what I was seeing. I knew my son was in pain, was scared, was being hurt in ways I couldn't fully protect him from. And I felt helpless, trapped in a nightmare of my own making because I'd been too proud to ask for help anywhere else. Too scared to end up homeless with a baby. Too desperate to see the trap before I walked into it. When Ethan was 5, he started kindergarten. I was hopeful that school would give him a break from Vivian. He would give him a space where he could just be a normal kid. And for a few months, it did. His teacher said he was bright, curious, maybe a little shy, but he was adjusting well. He made friends. He came home with artwork and stories about what he learned that day. For the first time since moving back home, I felt like things might be okay. Then Vivian lost her job. She came home one Tuesday afternoon, stormed into the house, and spent an hour screaming on the phone with someone, probably her former boss. When she finally calmed down enough to talk, she told my parents that she'd been unfairly terminated, that her boss had it out for her, that she was going to sue for wrongful termination. My mother clucked sympathetically. My father assured her that everything would be fine, that she could take some time to figure out her next move. Neither of them suggested she pay rent or contribute to household expenses or get a new job immediately. The rules that applied to me apparently didn't apply to the golden child. With no job to go to, Vivian was home all the time. And with me working and Ethan in school only half days for kindergarten, she was alone with him more often. That's when things got really bad. She started calling it homeschooling. The public school system is failing him. She told my parents over dinner one night, "I've been researching early childhood development, and Ethan is behind in several key areas. Someone needs to supplement his education. That's very thoughtful of you." "Dear," my mother said, beaming at her. Then she turned to me with a critical eye. "Maybe if you spent less time at that diner and more time actually parenting, Vivian wouldn't have to step in." I wanted to scream that I was working so much because they were charging me exorbitant rent, that Vivian was unemployed and living rent-free while I was struggling just to keep my head above water. But I bit my tongue. Causing conflict would only make things worse for Ethan. Vivian's supplemental education started innocently enough. Or at least, it looked innocent from the outside. She'd have Ethan do worksheets, practice writing his letters, read to her from picture books. But then the expectations started escalating. The worksheets got harder, way beyond kindergarten level. The reading sessions grew longer. And if Ethan made a mistake, if he struggled with something that was too advanced for him, there were consequences. The first time I found marks on his palms, little red welts, like he'd been hit with something. He told me he'd fallen on the playground. The school called me at work the next day to tell me they'd noticed the marks too and wanted to make sure everything was okay at home. I assured them it was, feeling sick to my stomach at the lie. That night, I confronted Vivian. She denied everything. Said Ethan was lying. Said I was always looking for reasons to blame her for things. My parents took her side. As always. They suggested that maybe Ethan was acting out for attention. That maybe I should consider therapy for him. Therapy. For a 5-year-old who was being abused. As if he was the problem. I started documenting everything. I took pictures of every bruise. Every mark. Every time Ethan came home looking scared or withdrawn, I wrote down dates and times and what he told me happened. I kept it all in a folder hidden in my car. Because I knew if my family found it, they'd find a way to use it against me. I also started looking for resources. On my breaks at work, I'd use my phone to research women's shelters, low-income housing, legal aid services. I called a domestic violence hotline, even though I felt like a fraud because it was my son being abused, not me. The counselor on the phone told me that witnessing your child being harmed absolutely counted, that I was experiencing psychological abuse myself through the financial control and gaslighting. She gave me information about services, about how to build a safety plan, about how to protect myself legally. It was the first time in years that someone had told me I wasn't crazy, that what was happening wasn't normal, that I had a right to protect my child and myself. I sat in my car in the diner parking lot after that call and cried, relief and terror mixing into something that felt almost like hope. But hope is dangerous when you're trapped. Hope makes you think things can change. And sometimes that hope drives you to take action before you're really ready. I wasn't ready yet. I didn't have enough money saved. Didn't have a solid enough plan. Didn't have enough evidence that would hold up if my family fought me for custody. So, I waited. And watched. And documented. And hated myself a little more every day for not being strong enough to just grab my son and run. The year Ethan turned 6 was the worst one yet. Vivian had gone through several job interviews but hadn't gotten any offers, which my parents blamed on the economy, on ageism, on anything except the possibility that Vivian herself might be the problem. Her frustration made her meaner. Her control over Ethan tighter. She started implementing what she called fear-based learning. The philosophy was straight from my father's playbook. Fear makes you faster, makes you sharper, makes you stronger. To overcome weakness, you have to face your worst fears, head on. And Ethan, in Vivian's assessment, was weak in many ways. He was afraid of the dark, so she'd lock him in closets. He was afraid of heights, so she'd make him climb on things and threaten to push him if he wasn't fast enough coming down. He was afraid of being alone, so she'd drive him to parks and leave him there, making him find his own way home to build independence. I only found out about that last one when a neighbor called me at work, concerned that she'd seen Ethan walking alone down the main road, crying. I left my shift early, found him 2 blocks from home, picked him up, and drove straight back to the house to confront Vivian. She was in the living room, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. When I demanded to know why my 6-year-old son was walking home alone on a busy road, she looked up with genuine confusion. I told you. Fear-based learning. He needs to learn to be independent, to solve problems on his own. You baby him too much. Sarah, that's why he's so weak. He's 6 years old, and at 6 years old, I was already doing things on my own. So were you? Dad made sure of that. Remember when he left you at the mall to find your own way home, you were 7. It taught you resourcefulness. I did remember. I remembered being terrified, asking strangers for help, finally finding a bus that went near our neighborhood and walking the last 2 miles home in the dark. When I got home, my father had made me explain every decision I made, every mistake, every moment of fear, and then told me that next time I'd be faster, smarter, better. I remembered feeling like the world was a dangerous place where I couldn't trust anyone to help me, and now my sister was inflicting the same trauma on my son, calling it education, calling it character building, calling it love. That night, I made a decision. I was going to leave, ready or not. I didn't have enough money saved. I didn't have a perfect plan. But I had to get Ethan out of this house before Vivian's lessons killed him or broke him so badly he'd never recover. I started making calls during my breaks, looking for apartments I could afford. Most of them were in rough neighborhoods or were so expensive that even with 2 jobs, I wouldn't be able to afford food after paying rent. I looked into shelters, but the wait lists were months long. I asked friends if they knew anyone who needed a roommate, but most of my friends from before had moved on, had their own lives, had forgotten about me during my years of being trapped in my parents' house. I was running out of options when a regular customer at the diner, a man named Liam, who always left generous tips and always asked how I was doing, noticed I was upset. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon, and I'd just gotten off the phone with yet another landlord telling me my credit wasn't good enough. My income wasn't steady enough. My situation wasn't stable enough. Everything okay? Sarah, he asked when I brought him his check. I forced a smile. Just one of those days. You know, I know those days, he said kindly. Look, I don't mean to overstep, but I've been coming here for 2 years and I've watched you work harder than anyone I've ever seen. If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. Something about his genuine concern broke through my usual defenses. Maybe I was just that desperate for someone to see me, to acknowledge that I was struggling. Before I could think better of it, I asked, do you know anyone who needs a roommate or knows of any affordable housing? I need to move out of my current situation pretty urgently. Liam studied me for a moment, and I saw understanding dawn in his eyes. Understanding and concern. Is your son okay? He asked quietly. No, I said, the word escaping before I could stop it. No, He's not okay, and I need to get him somewhere safe. But I can't afford anywhere safe, and I don't know what to do. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then showed me a number. This is my sister. Her name is Jennifer. She's a family law attorney who does pro bono work. Call her today and tell her I sent you. She can help you navigate this. I stared at the number, my heart pounding. I can't afford an attorney. Jennifer will work with you on that. She's helped a lot of people in situations like yours. Please, call her. For your son's sake. I took a picture of the number with my shaking hands, thanked him, and went to the bathroom to cry. Someone was helping me. Someone believed me. Someone thought I deserved help without knowing all the ugly details or judging me for ending up in this situation. That phone call to Jennifer changed everything. She had me come to her office the next day, which was my day off. I brought Ethan with me because I didn't trust leaving him at home. While he played with toys in her waiting room, I told her everything. Every incident. Every injury. Every cruel word. Every manipulation. Every financial trap my parents had set. She listened to all of it without interrupting, taking notes, her expression growing more concerned by the minute. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and said, "Sarah, what's happening to Ethan is child abuse. What's happening to you is financial exploitation and psychological abuse. We need to get you both out of there immediately." "I don't have anywhere to go," I said miserably. "I've been looking, but I can't afford anything on what I make." "Let me make some calls," she said. "I know some people who might be able to help. In the meantime, I need you to keep doing what you're doing. Document everything. Record conversations, if you can do so legally. Keep Ethan safe as best as you can. And whatever you do, don't let your family know you're planning to leave." Over the next 2 months, Jennifer helped me build a case. She connected me with a social worker who documented Ethan's injuries and statements. She helped me open a new bank account at a different bank, one where my parents couldn't track my savings. She found me a small apartment through a program that helps domestic violence survivors, with rent subsidized to an amount I could actually afford. Most importantly, she helped me understand that I wasn't helpless, that I had rights, that there were laws protecting children and adults from the kind of treatment my family had normalized. She helped me see that wanting to protect my son didn't make me overdramatic or hysterical or paranoid. It made me a good mother. But even as I was planning our escape, even as I was building a case and gathering evidence and preparing for our new life, things at home kept getting worse. It was like Vivian could sense that something was changing, that her control was slipping, and she was determined to reassert her dominance. The incidents became more frequent, more dangerous, more terrifying. She'd wake Ethan up in the middle of the night for surprise quizzes, making him recite math facts or spelling words, slapping his hands when he got answers wrong, because he was too tired and scared to think straight. She'd make him hold heavy books over his head for minutes at a time to build strength and discipline. She'd criticize everything about him: his appearance, his intelligence, his personality, until he started to believe her when she said he was stupid, slow, worthless. I watched my bright, curious son shrink into himself, becoming keener, more withdrawn, and more convinced that he was fundamentally broken. And every day I didn't leave felt like another betrayal, another failure, another way I was letting him down. One Friday evening, I came home to find Ethan standing on a chair in the middle of the kitchen, balanced on one foot, with books stacked on his head. Vivian was timing him on her phone, her face expressionless. Ethan was shaking, tears streaming down his face, but he didn't dare move or cry out loud. "What are you doing?" I demanded, rushing forward to help him down. "Don't," Vivian said sharply. "He needs to last 5 minutes. He's only at 3. He's 7 years old. Vivian, get him down right now. This is exactly your problem. Sarah, you never let him push through discomfort. How's he supposed to develop any resilience when you coddle him like this?" I ignored her and helped Ethan down. He collapsed into my arms, sobbing, his legs cramping from holding the position so long. The books scattered across the floor. Vivian made a disgusted sound. "You're ruining him," she said flatly. "You know that, right? He's going to grow up weak and useless because you refuse to do what's necessary." What's necessary? I repeated, my voice shaking with rage. You think torturing a child is necessary. I think discipline is necessary. Structure is necessary. Pushing through fear is necessary. Dad always said fear makes you faster. Makes you better? Ethan needs to learn that lesson. Dad was wrong, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. Dad was wrong. And what he did to us was abuse. And what you're doing to Ethan is abuse. And I'm not going to let it continue. The room went silent. My parents had just walked in and heard every word. My father's face turned red. My mother's eyes went cold. And Vivian smiled. A slow, satisfied smile that made my blood run cold. Well, my father said, his voice dangerously quiet. It seems Sarah has finally decided to show her true colors. After everything we've done for her, this is the thanks we get. Accusations and insults. I'm not accusing anyone of anything they haven't done, I said, holding Ethan tighter. He had his face buried in my shoulder, still shaking. I'm protecting my son. From what my mother demanded. From family. From people who actually care about his future. You're being paranoid. Sarah. Dramatic as always. I have pictures, I said quietly, and recordings, and medical documentation, of every injury, every incident, every cruel thing that's been done to him in this house. The atmosphere changed instantly. My father's face went from red to white. My mother's hand flew to her throat. Vivian's smile disappeared. You've been spying on us, Vivian said, her voice rising. Recording private family moments. That's illegal. Actually, in this state, it's perfectly legal to record conversations you're a party to, I said, the words Jennifer had coached me on coming out steady despite my racing heart. And documenting injuries to a minor isn't spying. It's protective parenting. You ungrateful little bitch, my father said, taking a step toward me. I stood my ground, even as my heart hammered. After everything we've done for you, you turn around and threaten us. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm leaving. Ethan and I are leaving. And we're not coming back. Like hell you are, Vivian snarled. You can't afford to leave. You can barely afford to stay here. Where are you going to go? That's not your concern anymore. If you walk out that door, my father said, his voice cold and controlled again, you're not welcome back. Not ever. You'll be cut off from this family completely. Good, I said, and I meant it. That's exactly what I want. I carried Ethan upstairs to our room, locked the door, and called Jennifer. I think we need to move up the timeline, I told her. Things just escalated badly. How badly? She asked, concern in her voice. I confronted them. They know I have evidence. I don't think we're safe here tonight. Okay, she said, and I could hear her moving, gathering things. Here's what we're going to do. Pack a bag for you and Ethan. Just the essentials. I'm sending someone to pick you up in 30 minutes. You're going to stay at a safe house tonight. And tomorrow we're filing for emergency custody and a restraining order. Will that work? Can we really do this? Sarah, with everything you've documented, everything I've prepared. Yes, we can do this. But you need to be brave for about 30 more minutes. Okay, can you do that? Yes, I said, looking down at Ethan, who was watching me with wide, scared eyes. Yes, I can do that. Those 30 minutes felt like hours. I packed one bag with our essential documents. Some clothes. Ethan's favorite stuffed animal. I could hear my parents and Vivian downstairs, their voices rising and falling, arguing about what to do. At one point, my father came to the door and demanded I come out and talk to them rationally. I didn't answer. When I heard a car pull up outside, I looked out the window and saw a woman in a social services jacket getting out. Jennifer had sent a professional, someone who could document the situation if my family tried anything. I picked up Ethan, grabbed our bag, and opened the bedroom door. My family was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, all three of them, blocking the way out. For a moment, I thought they might actually try to stop us physically. But then there was a knock on the door. Firm and official. This is Child Protective Services. A woman's voice called through the door. I need to speak with Sarah Mitchell and Ethan Mitchell. My father had no choice but to open the door. The CPS worker, whose name was Diana, stepped inside and immediately assessed the situation. Me on the stairs with a crying child. My parents and sister blocking the way. The tension so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Ms. Mitchell, Diana said to me, ignoring my parents completely. I'm here to escort you and your son to a safe location. Are you ready to leave? Yes, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Yes, we're ready. Diana positioned herself between me and my family, creating a clear path to the door. As I walked past them with Ethan in my arms, my mother reached out like she might grab my arm, but Diana stepped in smoothly. Ma'am, please don't interfere. This is an official Child Protective Services intervention. You can't just take my grandson, my mother protested. But her voice lacked conviction. She knew they could. She knew they were. Your grandson is leaving with his mother, Diana said firmly. If you have concerns about that, you can address them through the proper legal channels. We were at the door now, almost free. Vivian suddenly moved, faster than I expected, reaching for Ethan. You're not taking him anywhere, she hissed. But Diana was faster, stepping between us and pulling out her phone. If you attempt to interfere with the removal of a minor from a dangerous situation, I will call the police immediately and you will be arrested for interference with Child Protective Services. Step back. Vivian stepped back, but her eyes were full of fury. This isn't over. Sarah, you think you can just leave? You think you can take him and keep him from us? We'll fight this. We'll get custody. We'll prove you're an unfit mother. Good luck with that, Diana said dryly. From what I've seen in Ms. Mitchell's documentation, you'll have an uphill battle. And then we were out the door, down the steps, into Diana's car. She drove us to a women's shelter on the other side of town, one that specialized in housing mothers and children fleeing dangerous situations. It wasn't fancy, just a converted house with several bedrooms and a communal living area. But it was clean and warm, and most importantly, my family didn't know where it was. That first night in the shelter, I lay in a twin bed with Ethan curled up next to me, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. We were out. We were safe. Whatever happened next, at least we were no longer under their control. But the fight was far from over. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Jennifer filed for emergency custody, which was granted immediately based on the evidence I'd provided, and Diana's report. A restraining order was issued against Vivian, barring her from any contact with Ethan. My parents weren't included in the order, but there were strict rules about supervised visitation that they had to follow if they wanted to see their grandson. They fought it. Of course, they hired an expensive attorney who tried to paint me as mentally unstable, as vindictive, as a woman who was using her son as a weapon against her loving family. They claimed I'd fabricated evidence, coached Ethan to lie, exaggerated normal discipline into abuse. But Jennifer was better. She had medical records showing injuries consistent with abuse. She had recordings of Vivian's own words, her own descriptions of her teaching methods. She had testimony from Ethan's school counselor, who talked about the dramatic change in his behavior over the past 2 years. She had my documentation, months and months of dates and times and detailed descriptions of incidents. Most devastating of all, she had Ethan's own testimony. Jennifer worked with a child psychologist to prepare him, to make sure he could talk about what happened without being re-traumatized. When the judge asked Ethan about living with his grandparents and aunt, my son's simple, honest words cut through every lie. My family's expensive lawyer tried to tell. Aunt Vivian said fear makes you fast. Ethan told the judge in his small, clear voice. She said Grandpa told her that, so it must be true. But I was fast and she still hurt me. She hurt me a lot. And when I told Mommy, Grandma and Grandpa said it was okay, that I needed to be tough. But Mommy said I don't have to be hurt to be tough. Mommy said being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you smart. And I think Mommy's right. The judge looked at my parents with barely concealed disgust. I've presided over many family law cases in my career, she said. but rarely have I seen such a clear-cut case of child abuse being enabled and perpetuated by an entire family system. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, you should be ashamed. You raised one daughter who abuses children and another daughter who you've systematically exploited and controlled. Ms. Vivian Mitchell, your actions toward your nephew are reprehensible and potentially criminal. She granted full custody to me, with the restraining order against Vivian made permanent. My parents were allowed supervised visitation only if they completed parenting classes and family therapy. They never took her up on the offer. But that wasn't the end of the fallout. Word spread quickly in their social circle about what had happened. My mother's charity organizations quietly asked her to resign. My father found himself removed from several community boards. Vivian, facing criminal charges for child endangerment, took a plea deal that included probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent mark on her record. The financial exploitation lawsuit that Jennifer filed on my behalf took longer to resolve, but eventually my parents settled out of court. They paid back everything they'd overcharged me, plus damages for the emotional distress and lost opportunity costs. It was more money than I'd ever had at once. Enough for a down payment on a small house in a good school district. We found a little Cape Cod-style home with 3 bedrooms and a fenced yard about 40 minutes from where my parents lived. Far enough that we wouldn't accidentally run into them. Close enough that I didn't have to uproot Ethan entirely from the area he knew. It was ours. Truly ours. With no landlord and no controlling family members and no strings attached. The house needed work, which was why it was in my price range. The kitchen was outdated. The bathroom had ugly tiles. And the yard was overgrown. But Ethan loved it immediately. He ran through the empty rooms, his footsteps echoing, laughing in a way I hadn't heard him laugh in years. Is this really ours? Mommy, he kept asking. Really, really ours. Really, really ours. I confirmed each time, feeling like I might burst with happiness. We moved in with donations from the shelter, from Jennifer, from Liam and his wife, who had become friends over the past few months. Mismatched furniture, hand-me-down dishes. But every imperfect piece represented freedom and safety and a fresh start. The first few months in our new home were an adjustment. Ethan had nightmares frequently, would wake up panicking that he was back in my parents' house. He'd developed anxiety around making mistakes. I would freeze up if he thought he'd done something wrong. We started therapy, both of us, working through the trauma with a counselor who specialized in family abuse. Slowly, gradually, I watched my son heal. The anxiety attacks became less frequent. The nightmares faded. He started smiling more, laughing more, being a kid again, instead of a tiny adult who was constantly on guard. He made friends at his new school, joined the soccer team even though he wasn't very good at it, brought home art projects and stories about his day. His teacher called me one day, several months after we'd moved, to tell me how impressed she was with his progress. When Ethan first started here, he was so withdrawn, she said. He barely spoke, seemed terrified of making mistakes. But now he's confident, participates in class, stands up for other kids when they're being picked on. Whatever you're doing, it's working. I told her thank you, hung up, and cried happy tears. We were doing it. We were actually healing. We were building a life that was healthy and safe and full of love. Liam remained a steady presence in our lives. He and his wife had us over for dinner regularly, included us in family events, became the kind of family that actually meant something. Ethan started calling him Uncle Liam, which made Liam tear up the first time he heard it. They'd show up to Ethan's soccer games, cheering louder than any other family there. They'd help with house repairs I couldn't afford to hire out. They modeled what healthy relationships looked like, what real support meant. I went back to school part-time, taking classes at the community college to become a licensed practical nurse. It was something I'd always wanted to do but never thought was possible. With the settlement money covering our basic needs and Ethan in school full-time, I finally had the space and resources to invest in my own future. It was hard, studying while working part-time and being a single mom, but it was the good kind of hard. The kind that built you up instead of breaking you down. I ran into my mother once, about 8 months after we'd left. I was at the grocery store with Ethan when I saw her in the produce section. She looked older, smaller than I remembered, When she saw us, she froze. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across the display of apples. Then she looked at Ethan, and I saw something flash across her face. Regret. Maybe. Or grief. Or the realization of everything she'd lost by choosing to enable abuse over protecting her grandson. Ethan pressed against my side, his hand finding mine. He didn't say anything. Didn't wave. Just held on to me like an anchor. My mother opened her mouth like she might say something, but I shook my head slightly. Whatever she wanted to say, we didn't need to hear it. She'd had years to say something that mattered, to do something that mattered, and she'd chosen silence and complicity every time. She closed her mouth, nodded once, and turned away. I watched her walk down the aisle, her cart empty, except for a single box of tea, looking like a woman who'd lost everything that actually mattered. I felt a moment of sadness, seeing her like that. Despite everything, she was still my mother. But then I looked down at Ethan, at his bright eyes and healing smile, and I knew I'd made the right choice. Her loss was our gain. Her inability to love us properly had freed us to build something better. That was 8 months ago. 8 months of slowly learning to trust again, to breathe again, to believe that we were actually safe. 8 months of watching my son transform from a scared, silent child back into the bright. A curious boy he'd been before we moved into that house of horrors. He still has nightmares sometimes. He still flinches at sudden movements. But he laughs now. Really laughs. The kind of laugh that comes from deep in his belly. He has friends at his new school. He's on a soccer team and he's terrible at it, but he loves it, and that's all that matters. He talks about his feelings now, instead of bottling them up. He knows that being afraid is okay, that asking for help is brave, that his worth isn't determined by how fast he is or how tough he is. Last week, his teacher called to tell me how well he was doing, how he'd stood up for another kid who was being bullied. "Where did you learn to be so brave?" the teacher had asked him. And Ethan had said, "My mom taught me. She taught me that real bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared." I cried when she told me that. Happy tears. Proud tears. Healing tears. I still see my parents sometimes. From a distance. At the grocery store. At community events. They look older now. Smaller somehow. They don't approach me. The restraining order doesn't extend to them. But they seem to understand that the bridge is burned beyond repair. Sometimes I catch my mother looking at Ethan with something that might be regret. But I don't let her close enough to find out. Vivian I haven't seen at all. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she moved to another state. Started over somewhere. No one knows her story. I hope she got help. I hope she learned something. But mostly, I just hope she stays far away from my son. Liam is still in our lives. He and his wife have become like family to us. The kind of family that actually means something. He comes to Ethan's soccer games. We have dinner at their house every Sunday. He's shown me what a healthy relationship looks like. What real support means. There's nothing romantic between us. Just deep friendship and gratitude. But he and his family have helped fill the void that losing my birth family created. I've learned so much in these 8 months. I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about love and respect and safety. I've learned that protecting someone you love sometimes means burning down everything you thought you knew and building something new from the ashes. I've learned that my father was wrong. Fear doesn't make you faster. Fear makes you reckless. Makes you disparity. Makes you do things that destroy yourself and the people around you. What makes you strong? What makes you truly unstoppable? Is peace. Peace with yourself. Peace with your choices. Peace with your boundaries. I've learned that I'm not weak. I never was. Endurance isn't weakness. Survival isn't weakness. Choosing to stay until you're ready to leave. Gathering your strength. Making your plan. That's not weakness. That's strategy. That's wisdom. That's the kind of strength that actually matters. And I've learned the most important lesson of all. I am a good mother. Not perfect. Not without mistakes. But good. Good enough. More than enough. I saved my son. I saved myself. And we're building a life that's ours. Shaped by our choices. Filled with our laughter. Protected by boundaries we set and maintain. There are still hard days. Days when I wonder if I could have done something differently. Something sooner. Days when the guilt tries to creep back in, but then Ethan will come home from school excited about something he learned. Or he'll hug me and tell me he loves me. Or he'll just exist in his safe, happy child way. And I know that I did exactly what I needed to do. My father used to say that fear makes you faster, but I've learned the real truth. Love makes you braver. Love makes you wiser. Love makes you willing to face down everything that scares you. To fight battles you never wanted to fight. To become stronger than you ever knew you could be. Not fear. Love. And that love, that fierce, protective, unconditional love for my son, is what saved us both. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice to protect someone you love? Have you ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to care for you because staying meant destroying yourself? Have you ever found strength you didn't? I know you had because someone needed you to be strong. Tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. None of us who've lived through these impossible situations are alone. And if this story resonated with you, if it gave you hope or made you feel seen or helped you understand that you're not crazy for wanting to escape a toxic situation, hit that like button. Subscribe because I'll be sharing more about our healing journey, about the practical steps I took to get us out and get us safe, about the resources that helped us. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because the most dangerous lie that toxic people tell us is that we're trapped, that we're powerless, that we have no choice but to endure. But we always have a choice. It might not be easy. It might be terrifying. It might mean losing everything you thought you knew, but you always have the choice to save yourself and the people you love. You are stronger than you think. You are braver than you know. And you deserve peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from living a life that's true to yourself rather than contorted to please people who will never be satisfied. Never forget that.